Welcome to the Manipal Academy of Higher Education, TAPMI Bengaluru. We have assembled here today at the TAPMI Management Institute, Bengaluru, to engage in a panel discussion on the Union Budget 2026-27. This discussion would be led by students who come from different units of the TAPMI Bengaluru campus. We have students Anchit Bordoloi,
Morning.
Ananya Nagesh and Ritika Srivastava, who are from the Department of Commerce. We have Akshat Verma, Sanidhya Senaroy, and Srinidhi, who are from the TAPMI. And we have Abhinav, Gauri, and Nandita, who belong to the Department of Liberal Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences, the DLHS. Welcome to the panel discussion. Here we go. So I would like to first, know your thoughts about the transformation of the triple engine growth that was talked about by the Union government in the last year, 2025-26, to the triple kartavya that the government is talking right now. Your thoughts on that? Yes, DOC.
So basically we had three engines for economic growth. The first one focused on agriculture, the second one focused on MSMEs, and the third one focused on investments.
So the current budget is a Yuva Shakti driven budget, which is driven to focus on poor, underprivileged and disadvantaged. So it has been driven by a concept called government Sankalp. So the Sankalp basically focuses on three kartavya. Kartavya number 1, accelerate and sustain economic growth. The second kartavya, to fulfill aspiration of our people. The third one is a vision of Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas.
Okay, can I have the views of, Kartavya number 1? Why should India be looking for Kartavya number 1 from the TAPMI?
I think as I already spoke about, India has preserved this triadic approach to its kartavyas and the likes, right? So the first kartavya essentially encompasses growth, economic growth in place. So growth, as the government kind of positioned it as, is not ancillary, growth is the mode we have in place, right? So growth kind of funds every other capacity that we have in place. It builds resilience, it builds the engine before kind of putting in the fuel which is much needed for the economy. So it also kind of doubles as a shock absorber. It builds domestic capacity, the infrastructure is kind of reinforced, and that is how we maneuver our way into today's economy.
Okay, to the DLHS team, my question to you is that why would India look for the inclusive growth, right? The Kartavya number 3, what we are talking about, right? I mean, we take Sabka Saath and Sabka Vikas, and why it's capacity building, important for the nation, the Kartavya number 2.
I mean, if you look at the Kartavya 3, you will see that it matters because there's a shift from welfare as consumption to welfare as capability. By investing in skill development, education, healthcare, mental health facilities, or the care economy itself, or any women-led enterprises, or even the Divyajan empowerment movement, the budget treats citizens not as passive beneficiaries. In fact, they move towards being active contributors to the economy, which I think is very important. It is also recognizing the unpaid and the invisible labor, especially caregiving, and which is the foundation of economic productivity. By strengthening the care ecosystem, it is directly enabling workforce participation, particularly for women.
So the third kartavya, which talks about inclusive development, it talks about addressing skill development gaps and especially gender gaps in the education sector. So for example, there was a scheme that talked about implementing a girls' hostel in every district so that a woman can stay for prolonged hours of study. And also building skills in the rural economy, in agriculture, giving them the right equipment, even AI applications that they might need, such as Bharat Vistar.
Okay, interesting. Now let's deep dive. Yes, Akshat, you have a point to add?
As the very learned panelists of mine have already said about the three kartavyas, I would like to wrap it up of what the three kartavyas and the budget 26-27 have planned to do. What I feel is that the Indian government is trying to balance the critical equation of the Indian economy by sustaining macroeconomic factors and equating it with long-term sustainable growth. So as we move forward in this discussion and deep dive into each of the kartavyas, we must keep in mind that this budget is not just for one sector of the country or one sector of the industries. It's about something that has been growing for the past 75 years, and we plan to make it more sustainable, more rich and more enriching for every participant of this, made inside the geographical borders of the nation or towards all the Indians who are spread across the globe.
Fantastic, Akshat. Let's move a deep dive into Kartavya number 1. What do you think about, what are the various facets of Kartavya number 1?
So I think that the main aspect of Kartavya number 1 is the infrastructure of it. Everyone is talking about this. It's on the highlight of every newspaper. The capex expenditure that is given this year is 12.2 lakh crores, which is approximately 8% increase from last year, which was 11.6 lakh crores. And this means that government is focusing on long-term growth rather than short-term. And it shows that the government is having a sustained growth. This is not something that was unexpected because last year it has increased even more. So this is expected sustained growth. And coming to every aspect of infrastructure, I think this time something that the government has done new is the infrastructure risk guarantee fund, where partial credit guarantee is given to the lenders. So this would help people in giving loans even more. And then logistics part of it, there is a new freight corridor being built. There are 20 new national waterways being built. There's also coastal cargo promotion scheme for coastal areas of the country for their promotion and their growth and welfare. There's also development for the states. The government has given 2 lakh crores for the under the states which come in SASI scheme. They will be developed, and then there's also a very huge part of this where there are high speed rail corridors being built. So I think this will help in the long term growth again because it will take some years for these projects to finish.
So when you talk about the freight corridors, I'm given to understand that they are opening a freight corridor from Dankuni in West Bengal to Surat in the west. So
Yes.
this is something which will, ease, movement of goods, capital, across the country. Other thoughts from DOC and DLHS?
I mean, as a student of social sciences, it is kind of my obligation to bring this up. When we focus on transport infrastructure to this extent, often, to create like agglomeration economies, we are reducing travel times and we're integrating markets, which is all amazing. Like it fully fits with Viksit Bharat Abhiyan that we have. And also, it does increase the manufacturing hubs as well. But if we shift the lens from GDP to social inequality, we have to ask, like, who actually builds and services these growth corridors? And of course,
So I will stop there because we will discuss that in the part 3 where we will say about Sabka Saath and Sabka Vikas, right? Typically, we are now focusing on the infrastructure sector. Would you like to add something more to the infrastructure sector?
Yeah, in terms of the mission that we have right now, they are planning to start with ISM 2.0. And that is it is basically India's semiconductor mission, where they plan to produce equipment, materials, and also basically design full stack IP for India. And also, there's a lot of this number that keeps repeating and recurring, and that's the number 10,000 crores that they've allocated for 2 different things. One is the biopharma that they want to develop, and the other one is the MSMEs.
As DLHS and DOC have delved a bit into the infrastructural side of it, I would just like to reinstate the fact that India as an economy and India as a country has been plagued because of operational bottlenecks and logistical issues, which this budget has tried to offset with very brilliance of including 7 high-speed rail corridors, seaplane manufacturing coming into picture, and also that the way they are moving forward with it. It's not just now limited to say one part of the country, be it the Western Ghats or the Eastern Ghats. Now they are actually moving towards connecting the breadth of the country from West Bengal to Gujarat, which is not just going to help out the people of the nation, but also as imposing tariffs loom on us. It's a big relief for the people of the manufacturing sectors, especially as their products can reach the ports at the minimum costs, and now they can actually have a competitive edge across all tariffs being implied on the country.
I mean, I can personally kind of engage with this discussion because I teach project finance, and then the government talks about viability gap funding, BGF, which is for the seaplanes, right? I mean, that is something interesting because we know that once we go for these mammoth projects, corporate finance route would not work, and it is the project finance route that go into things. Other views, please?
so coming to the manufacturing sector, so the union government has given a strong push to the sector with a clear vision to make India a global manufacturing hub. So first, their main focus is on strengthening domestic manufacturing of high value and technology intensive products. And new initiatives have been announced for electronics, component, biopharma, and rare earth permanent magnets. Second, they have created infrastructure in these clusters which will help MSMEs and large industries to improve productivity, reduce costs, and create more jobs.
So as Ritika rightly said, that the budget has been spending so much on infrastructure and manufacturing. I would like to highlight the point of MSMEs over here. So there's a lot of expenditure on infrastructure which will lead to better roads and railways and other better infrastructures all over. So due to which MSMEs funding would be less and you can improve more education and then healthcare and also create local jobs. Further looking into what the government has done for the MSME sectors. So it has included the equity support, rupees 10,000 crores for the SME growth fund and rupees 2,000 crore to the micro enterprises, and also liquidity support. And third one would be the professional support, which would be to develop a corporate mantra for the tier 2 and tier 3 towns.
Kartavya 1 also talks about the various other facets, right? Like structural reforms. Let's look into that. Now, what are the various structural reforms that the government has talked about?
So when we talk about structural reforms that the government is currently persuading, we also should have a mind on what was not working for the country. Till now, India as a country was really focusing on project by project growth, and all major infrastructure projects were not being able to be completed, such as the Bharatmala Phase 1, because of a lack of investment and lack of presence of big companies and committees who are actually willing and have the capacity to undertake such projects. But as we move forward and with the new tax reforms coming into picture, it's becoming increasingly clear that the government has a clear understanding of where we were lacking and how we should proceed. That is by allowing these companies to operate on a more freer basis. And as far as the maritime and waterways transformation goes, because structurally reforming a country just does not mean that we have to reform one sector. It means that we have to reform the entirety of all the sectors involved. So when we talk about infrastructure, and maritime and waterways was something that was really overlooked by the country, but now as we move forward with the manufacturing of seaplanes not just being limited to major waterways that are the seas, but also the hinterland waterways or the inland waterways are coming into the picture. This not only just reduces the dependency on trucks and roadways logistics, which is actually helping us to better our shield against tariffs or against the volatile oil market as it is moving forward.
Basically, the government, what I feel, is looking at the 350 kind of reforms that they had put for GST implementation, isn't it? And they're also talking about improving the quality of indigenous goods which India is producing, and therefore they're talking about quality control orders. They've also, notified the, labor, codes. And I think, any views from the exports, import side, I mean, from the perspective of, enhancing growth?
I think from the imports and export side, recently there has been a lot of global uncertainty, as we all know, related to the tariffs and also about the volatile geopolitical situation that is around. I think the budget focuses a lot on stability as well, not just growth, because without stabilizing the economy, it won't be possible to actually control the situation right now because of the uncertainty that it has. So India has learned a lesson from the East Asian economies, I would say, because economies like South Korea and Taiwan relied a lot on export-led growth to achieve economies of scale and stabilize their earnings and reduce vulnerability. So for India, strengthening the exports would mean they would be able to manage their current account and also stabilize the rupee, where the exchange rate has been fluctuating a lot right now and the rupee has actually been weakening for quite some time now. Another thing is, from the exports point of view, there should be a focus on service exports. As we can see in the budget, India has comparative advantage in service exports because service exports have higher value addition compared to manufacturing. Manufacturing faces a lot of global competition and lower returns compared to service exports.
So I think they're kind of trying to get, share of 10%, right? I mean, service sector, that is what they're doing.
Yes, basically the overall.
Now, if you look at the import-export thing, I think there are a lot of concessions which are given on the BCD, the basic customs duty on, let's say you want to manufacture an aircraft. So if you import parts, you get some custom duty benefit. Or if you want to go for maintenance, overhaul, etc. of aero engines, then you get custom duty kind of a relief. for the parts which you are kind of procuring. Also, in order to boost microwave production, if you kind of import microwave chips, etc., then you get a kind of custom duty imports. Let's move on to Kartavya 2. Now, Kartavya 2 envisages that we must build capacity and we must work, the government must work for the benefits of the people, of India. So therefore, let's discuss the Kartavya 2. So what are your thoughts, DLHS, first?
So when it comes to the second kartavya and talking about capacity building, the budget focuses a lot on urbanizing rural areas, on the agriculture, on the rural economy, also on strengthening the care economy so that workers have the right support system that they need. Also building on the education sector and building human capital, such as the government announced 5 university townships near industrial logistics corridors to cluster universities and like research and skill centers. And this, I feel, invites a lot of students, even from abroad, to come here and research and kind of boost the Indian economy in terms of this field.
Okay, any thoughts on the health sector? I think they have talked a lot about creating capabilities in the health sector.
There is an allocation of around 1,04,599 crore, and it highlights that they're planning to set up NIMHANS 2 as well. And there are a lot of mental health institutions being upgraded in Ranchi and Tezpur area, and they're also establishing emergency and trauma care centers in district hospitals. So we can see that these are some important steps that are being taken place this year.
Any thoughts on the orange economy, on medical tourism that the government talked about? Do you see?
So more than just orange economy, I believe the entire focus of this one's budget was on the labor market as well as MSD, because it was also aiming at youth employability and the state of employment in our generation right now. So MSD, which is the Ministry of your Skill Development and Entrepreneurship, has increased its allocation by 62% compared to last year. So now it's 9,855 crores. And also, the entire objective is to skill the citizens and make sure that they get the jobs. They're also putting a lot of importance into the labor market as well. Because according to KPMG, the unemployment trend has somehow gotten down to 4.8%. And when it comes to human capital as well, they have made quite a bit of good allocation for it, around 1,39,289 crores, which is a 14.2% increase. According to the previous statements, they've made sure that there is STEM institutions, AVGC labs that are found in schools and colleges as well.
I think as we talk about the second kartavya, right, something that is of like epochal importance in this regard would be how AI and IT kind of interpaired and was led through the entire conversation, the entire conundrum of it. So as we all know how AI and IT is in vogue in place already, it was mentioned a staggering 11 times in this year's union budget speech, right? So you have the government. So what the first kartavya kind of enables is what the second kartavya builds upon, the capacity building. So you have at about 10,300 crores going under the India AI mission. So the compute, of course, is the binding constraint in this regard. You have data qualities kind of improving. You have AI COEs coming in place, the curriculums kind of further enabling it. You already reinforce the importance of orange economy, getting into the creatives and the entertainment industry and enabling the youth participation in this regard. So the government was also propelled by their stance to fuel the youth in place and enable them to break through in this regard. Also, you have the talent and COEs, the compute and deployment. So they also, of course, tended to a very triadic approach. They had the policy and architecture in place. You have ethical AI frameworks. You have an interpolable AI chips coming in. You have the AI-driven efficiency system. So the advocacy of it, the humanoid in the human, is kind of taking over the tide.
I think this time they also talked about the India Kilo mission, isn't it? Yeah. So some thoughts on that. And also on the health sector, where they talked about, putting people, equipped with the knowledge of radiology, anesthesia, geriatric care, and so on and so forth.
So before I delve deeper into the Khelo India missions of the government, when we talk about healthcare as a sector and the second kartavya being that let's coverage first and capacity first and coverage second, it's very important to remember that India's disease burden is of non-communicable diseases. And as the Honorable Finance Minister herself said that over the next 5 years, India expects to spend over 10,000 crores just in the treatment of non-communicable diseases. So it's important that we remember that oncology, lab technicians and radiologists and skills which are of the hour, and India needs to cover first. So with that, when they were talking about the 200-day care cancer centers that will be established in every district, they were very linearly saying that the Indian care for these non-communicable diseases shall not just be restricted to tier 1 or tier 2 tertiary medical centers, but shall be reaching the inner roots and nodes of the country, which is further enhanced by the Urban Development Challenge Fund that has been set up. Basically shows how the government is now planning to switch from tier 1s being developed first to tier 2 and tier 3 becoming the growth nodes of the country. Also, just before I wrap it up, I would also like to throw some light that over 10,000 new MBBS seats have been promised and are much required in the country. But we also must remember that these 10,000 seats, even if they're continuously added for the next 10 years, still require a 5-year degree period to be finished before these students are qualified doctors and can join the workforce. And with that, India's one budget blind spot that I feel, as we're already talking about the healthcare sector, I'll take the liberty to explore it a bit, is that COVID had already exposed India's reliance on pharmaceutical sector's imports, specifically the global disruption that was caused during COVID and how vulnerable we as citizens and the government felt for the country. But this budget has also not really focused on the intermediates that are being imported by the country, and the tax and customs are set as is. A small thing that they have done is that 37 life-saving drugs have been changed and exempted. But again, it's not about the final product. It's about the intermediates that the country requires. The volume of the intermediates is far surpassing that of the final drugs. So I think it's better if the country, moving forward, the government takes into regard how the intermediates are planning across, not just the final products.
Finally, let's move on to the tourism, right? Tourism and the medical tourism that the government talked about, in developing the capacity across India.
I think when we come to tourism, of course, there's this thing of culturation happening. You, of course, have people coming in. And so the government is kind of facilitating this by having a 15.5% safe harbor. You, of course, have these foreign firms, them coming in and kind of exploring and treading waters in this regard. The other offside of it could be the Indian firms are not being benefited from this. So it's a two-sided coin, really.
I think the government has also kind of promised, right, to kind of develop a National Institute of Hospitality, and also to kind of build capacity for 20,000 guides across the iconic locations in the country. I think that is a great thing that the government can do in terms of capacity building. Right. Any other thoughts, DLHS?
Yeah. So when it comes to the tourism sector, I think that's a great way to promote heritage. And as you said, the government has planned to launch a pilot to upskill 10,000 tourist guides across 20 iconic sites via structured training. They've planned to develop 15 archaeological sites such as Dholavira into vibrant, experiencing cultural destinations to attract higher value tourism and local jobs. Also to promote trekking and hiking trails and heritage circuits around India.
Great. Let's move on to the Kartavya 3 now, the discussion of Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas. DOC, your thoughts on that? Why is it important and what is government kind of looking into in the future?
The reason why, even in the last fiscal year, one of our engines of growth was agriculture is because most of our sector is still dependent on agriculture, right? There's a lot of other things as well. There are a lot of other issues, and that's why the government tries its best to make sure that group of people also benefit. Such as for animal husbandry, they're trying to provide them proper quality, so employment opportunities in both rural and mid-urban areas, right? And also they are trying to basically support animal husbandry sectors, like the entrepreneurship sectors. And also there's a high value to agriculture, they're trying to diversify the farm outputs to increase the productivity and also enhance the farmers' incomes as well. And also when it comes to exports that we were discussing earlier, right? India is one of the largest producers of coconuts. And there is going to be a lot of things which I'm going to mention that keeps going back to the previous conversations here and there. But the other important thing came all to the exports as well, is that they're not trying to categorize more things into screening when it comes to imports as well, where they're trying to categorize 7 different diseases so that, it doesn't really affect our nation.
I think one thing that the government has done different from last times was that, as the name suggests, Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, the government is giving something to the citizens outside India, but the Indian citizens who are living abroad. So they have let the citizens abroad invest in Indian stock markets from the next coming year. So I think that is something very different, and it adds on to the name that they've given to the third kartavya.
I mean, I have to bring up the point I had brought up earlier. When we think of infrastructure or growth corridors or everything that is going on currently, we have to think that who actually builds and services these growth corridors. The answer obviously is migrant labor. Workers who come from poorer states and districts, often from lower caste, and who are working in precarious informal conditions. The budget document is very clearly listing out the detailed allocations for high-speed road, freight corridors, etc. But there is not much expenditure that's going into labor hostels or occupational health or social security or childcare for these very migrant workers who could make the infrastructure possible. We see a powerful vision, right, to connect growth cities, but not an equally detailed vision to see the lives of the people who are making these things for us. I feel like we need to see from this kind of perspective as well. Otherwise, we're not kind of fulfilling the reason why such a discussion is happening.
So I would like to talk a little about the AI implementation in agriculture. So the government has launched Bharat Vistar. It's an AI tool to integrate agri-stock portals where ICAR packages on agricultural practices and AI systems are going to enhance farm productivity. And further, we see that there are something called She-Marts, which are basically for rural women for their community-owned enterprise outlets where they can get little financial independence, a little more freedom for their self-earning and responsibilities.
Okay.
As everybody has been speaking about how the budget is sabka saath, sabka vikas, I think with all the few negatives that have been highlighted, there's always a silver lining. Being a very big of an optimist myself, I would like to highlight how exactly the government is now inculcating the gig workers. As gig workers has been the largest growing employment sector with Instamart, Blinkit and everybody coming into the picture, that now they'll have e-Shram access and health insurance. So even though they are not per se your normal employees as we call with their own insurance benefits and everything, the government is at least trying to reach out to the people who are actually building these things up. Obviously, there are many gaps which yet have to be fulfilled. But again, in a country of 1.47 billion, it's the thought that counts.
My 2 cents would be, the government is working towards the fisheries, right? I think they have developed, they are proposing to develop Amrit Sarovars. 500 such Sarovars are kind of thought about. Also with terms to agriculture, I think they are looking at the high value products like sandalwood, pine nuts, then you have walnuts kind of, stuff what they are looking at for exports. To conclude now, I would request each team to kind of conclude your thoughts. Team DOC, Team TAPMI and Team DLHS. First to Team DOC.
Okay, so basically from what I'd like to conclude is that this is not for short term. Like this is not a short term sort of advantage that we're looking for in this country. This is looking more of a long term aspect because there's a lot of things that this budget is trying to set. And I think one of the most important things that this budget has stated, but not many have noticed, is that we are technically having a race right now, and that is with the SMI again. Like how I mentioned about how I mentioned about semiconductors, right, and the mission they have right now. The reason they want to do is because they're having a semiconductor race with China, which by the way owns 90% of the market right now. And at any time, if there is some sort of issue between two of these countries, it would really affect our trade and as well as our everyday lives as well. The other thing which I really liked about this budget in particular is the fact that there has been investments put in the northeastern regions of India as well, particularly your Sikkim, Assam, Manipur, Mizoram and Tripura.
Yeah, so we have the, mental health setup coming at, that is the, it's getting revived in Tejpur. We have the other corridors which are being set up, and we had the NID which has come up recently at Assam. So these are some of the things that I am following.
What a good investment, because even in the government website right now, right, where they give everything in short and detailed, concise manner.
Okay.
They have invested quite a bit in the northeastern regions, and that is about 6,800 or 12.
I think the House has already deliberated on, this is kind of facilitating and enabling our economy in place. But of course, Akshat was glaringly optimistic about the budget. I think to kind of offset that, maybe get into how we had execution variances across the states, right? Some states were clearly a lot more incentivized. They were given a lot more funds. And so you had these skilling you had capacity building, which is of course very integral to the functioning of any economy. That is what the second kartava was premised upon. But when you are skilling, when your skilling kind of outspaces the jobs you have, that really does not lend into anything, right? You also have the large firm bias and incentives. You have the foreign firms kind of being benefited while borderline stifling the firms we have in home already. You have the tech reducing transparency without further audits because, of course, as integral as IT and AI is, it's in vogue. It's all across. It's making headlines, right? But when you kind of take away the human from all these interactions, it kind of dwindles and you have these white spaces coming in there. So, of course, I'd have my teammates convening on this.
I have a question to everyone actually. I think that we've talked a lot about investment this time, and the long-term investment is great. All of this, the capex expenditure, this is done for the long-term growth of the country. But something that nobody is asking or talking about is what about short-term? How could we develop our country in the next 1-2 years? How would it lead to growth? I do agree that the rest of the sectors are also getting developed because of the infrastructure growth, but is it enough? And also another pressing issue or the question is that the implementation part of it. Budget is definitely allocated. It's 12.2 lakh crores, which is great. But how long will it take to implement? How efficient is the country right now to implement it? Are the laborers sufficient? What are the labor laws that are related to it? I think all of this in depth is not clearly mentioned in the budget. And this is a question that we need to ask ourselves. Is it enough for the country in the next 2 years, or is it only going to help us after 10 years?
I mean, one thing that comes to my mind is that when we look at the infrastructure projects, we bring the good sides of both the private parties as well as the public parties through PPPs. Right, so that is the way to go, and then they have shown tangible results, right? Whether you talk about, the Bengaluru airport or the airports at Hyderabad, I mean, these, results have come through the PPP model. So, maybe going forward, we will have, some views. DLHS, your parting thoughts?
Finally, I feel the budget has strongly emphasized on strategic resilience. As in, they have looked at the short-term concerns and tried to address that as well. And also, while thinking long-term about growth, so the growth is projected around 7.4% for the GDP, and inflation is lowest, which is around 1.7%. For the growth part of it, budget looks pretty good for focusing on long-term growth while also providing short-term stability related to issues like international trade, exports and imports.
So this is the first time a sector like transport has crossed the defense allocation. However, given India's current limitations in high-end technology and manufacturing, a significant portion of this spending may go towards importing machines and technology. How does the panel view this in terms of long-term domestic capability building?
The thing that comes to my mind is that they are working about a lot of stuff in the filing of the bill of entry. They have talked about the bill of entry filing, and about certain private parties and government parties who have been regularly either importing or exporting. Make these things work in a much faster way. The other thing, that the government is looking about is lowering the basic custom duty, the, countervailing duty and things like that.
For your question that how is exactly transportation going to help us out? The point is that if you look back at how India has been functioning, as I had already mentioned during the panel also, we were constantly plagued by operational bottlenecks because we as a country were heavily reliant on ports, either say it be it Visakhapatnam, be it Surat, be it your Mumbai port or the ports in Gujarat. The time is of essence now that we start into developing sports across the nation, because as the geopolitical tensions, again, I'm very sorry to bring geopolitics into this conversation, but again, India is already surrounded by nations who are not the best of neighbors to us as of now. So we don't know exactly when a blockade towards this country's geopolitics can come or from where it can come. So when we expand our transportation budget, it's important that we cover the entirety of the length and breadth of the nation, and we're able to safeguard ourselves from both importing and exporting. So when you talk about importing the equipments, if we are getting blockades from all sides, how will we be able to import the things in the first place? So that's why I think transportation is of.
Even one more thing that comes to my mind is the central public sector enterprises. So when you have your tool rooms, if you have these tools have to indigenized. So there has been a lot of discussion about why is it taking time? Because indigenization of the tooling system is something that we have been seeing for decades. Okay, this was the problem. So I think this particular budget talks about the indigenization of tools, particularly for CPSEs.
Also in this regard, of course, as Akshat already reinforced, the multimodality of transport in our country will be further built upon. We'll just pivot from being highly reliant on just ports to, take to other methods as well. I think something that is also very important in this space would be the integration of AI and IT and building capacity at large. I think that will kind of further feed into how we perceive transport and how that will translate in the days to come.
In case, we can even think further about, storage mechanisms for agriculture.
Even with the semiconductors coming in, you have the EVs coming in place, you have all these burgeoning transport companies.
So I just wanted to ask that we have data centers coming up, AI, IT, and that government has recently announced a tax holiday for data centers till 2047. That is around 22 years. But then again, the government aims to bring our fiscal deficit ratio as part of GDP to around 4.5%. They are aiming for 4.4% for this fiscal year. So if the government is giving a tax holiday, this will reduce their tax revenue as well. So as Nidhi also mentioned that everyone is focusing on long-term growth, but then how should the government or how should the policy makers focus on the short-term revenue losses? What can be done for that?
I think what this time's government budget is expecting is that it wants more of private investment that is coming in. I think the FDI, foreign direct investment that is coming in, they want to increase that. Through that, I think that would help a bit in the short term. And other than that, any other short-term benefits would again take a while. Maybe the next budget would announce something that would lead to some short-term goals. But as of now, there is a lot of long-term investment that is seen. Another thing is that this long-term growth that is there in infrastructure, although it is seen that it will be developed in a few years, there are so many relevant sectors that are getting developed. For example, like I mentioned, labor is increasing, because of which I think the wages will also increase if there's a lot of demand for laborers. So a lot of sectors are increasing and there's growth everywhere. So I think through this, maybe there'll be some short-term growth.
And I think they're kind of trying to feed into the already existing trend. You already know that data centers are already attracting around billions of dollars of investment. And this budget clearly wants to accelerate that trend and to build on from there. So it makes sense as a strategy.
So the other day I'd been to the E-Plane office. It's in Chennai, right? So what they are working towards is air mobility. They're having air taxis in place. That is, of course, building upon the infrastructure we have. That is yet to await, right? That will come in the very many days to wait to see that happening. But also, as we already spoke of, something that the budget really lacked was the budget complexity. You didn't have the numbers coming in. You had frameworks kind of creeping through the main story that was kind of unveiled upon. Of course, this is a major glaring white space. Yeah, second to that.
Just to add one last line to all this, that maybe the tax holiday that's coming right now, the government isn't really focusing on the fiscal deficit in ratio, but more towards how exactly they can start treating data and infrastructure as a core infrastructure component than just being an add-on or an afterthought to it as it used to be.
There is a long-term vision, right? They don't want to bring down the debt to GDP, by I think 2030, 31. By that time, it should be 50 plus minus 1% of GDP. That's
but there is also a lack of...
wait and see how things are. And maybe they would bring some more, how many people paid the taxes. That also should be considered. Over a period of time, maybe the more proportion of population pay their taxes, which is due to the government.
I'm Professor Anuradha. I teach microeconomics here. I want to specifically ask about the manufacturing sector. So the PMI, Performance Managers Index, since a couple of years, specifically last year and December 2025 to be very specific, has been seeing a continuous dip. So it is on the contractionary phase as compared to the services sector that we have. In January, we have seen a gradual recovery, very gradual recovery. So all the measures that have been addressed from the infra side, the investments that has gone to the infra, that has gone to the MSMEs, semiconductors, it is not directly indicating a very direct measure to investor sentiments because transaction taxes have been imposed. So how do we see the sectoral reforms in manufacturing specifically to address this? Considering the amount of capex that has gone this time, there's a lot of capex last fiscal year that was still unused. So what specifically can we see the budget? How do we see the budget addressing this? Not maybe like a short term, but how do we see it as a long term measure?
I think it is about more of kind of an implementation issue, isn't it? I mean, if we talk about the semiconductor, we know that there is semiconductor thing which is going to come at Jagi Road, right? Now, if we go there and see in the reality, has this semiconductor space have come up in Jagi Road? Although, things have progressed, but on the ground, things are...
Because point one mission was to start the semiconductor industry, but this one, it's to create equipments. And also because, with the whole popularity of AI, they're trying their best to kind of integrate AI into this nation as a whole.
I think there is an issue with implementation part in infrastructure as well. Like the freight corridor, last year also budget was given to build a freight corridor, and it's not even reached to half of its implementation, and they've given allocated budget again for this freight corridor. So implementation part of it is an issue, but if they're positive and giving the budget again to the same thing in another place, that means they're optimistic that they will do something better this year.
Ma'am, I will not be trying to address the question because again, that's a very big and an abstract part of it, and the budget this year was pretty abstract in its own nature. But a food for thought for all the participants and the attendees would be that, does this budget is marking a moment in India's infrastructure and healthcare and India's budgetary allowances, or to finally move from being promises on paper to actionable movements on the ground? Or again, is it just going to end up like another plan that was well thought of, but too far thought of to actually become something feasible in the coming future? So ma'am, as you said that at the point, it again comes to very essence of it that right now we think that this budget is a starting point for all those indexes to normalize themselves, and over some years we'll be seeing sustainable growth and sustainable impact of these budgets as they are very long term in their nature. And as you've also pointed out that the short term effect of these is it's abstracted and was not really covered in depth by the government itself.
Thank you, team, for such an engaging discussion. It was really wonderful to discuss the budgetary column.